Welcome to the Two Truths podcast. I am Dr. Jared Jones, research specialties, ancient systems of meditation, Buddhist philosophy, and the philosophy of science. Today I have with me Lama Karma, otherwise known as Justin Wall. Really extraordinary practitioner, has done 2 3-year retreats in the Kagyu Nyingma tradition, and has worked on a large number of different projects and run a retreat center, is also a layperson living in the real world and dealing with many of the issues that you and I might deal with as lay people in the real world. So I figured, my goodness, what a wonderful guest to have onto the show. So, Justin, welcome. Glad to have you.
Welcome. Thanks for having me, Jared.
So, first, for the people that don't know you, just tell us a little bit about your background in terms of, life, how you met the Dharma, how you ended up in retreat, and just the broad strokes of your life.
Okay, yeah. It's always a question of how far back you want to go, right? But I think, like a lot of people, I came to the Dharma because of just suffering, really. Not being able to, initially, many layers of suffering that I wasn't even aware of. But what I was aware of was just not being able to make sense of things. There's basic questions of who am I and what is the world, and in a deeper sense of what is it fundamentally. And for some reason that was just kind of like a screw in the middle of my brain that, unless it was relieved or resolved, I couldn't be at peace. And so that was good in a way because it propelled me um, to study, particularly just a lot of reading at first. But when I landed in university, studying English literature, particularly literary theory,
Hmm.
which at the time was very much informed by postmodernity and the concerns of relativity, and at the same time, uh, religious studies. So I was studying all the religions, but particularly the mystical traditions. And through that confluence of those two streams, and also with the help of Bob Thurman, who was my thesis advisor, really was able to, as you know, be blessed basically by Nagarjuna and
Hmm.
the Indian scholastic tradition, as it is held in present day by the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And so it was more of
Hmm.
a philosophical question that drove me to Buddhism, because although I felt like there was a lot of mystical traditions that were able to navigate that space and to actually speak from that place with authenticity, I also wanted to meet living examples of the teachings, you might say. And
Right.
so, really just looking around. I mean, I'm sure on some level I was being drawn by something more or deeper or more instinctual, but really just looking around practically and saying, well, where are most of the mystics these days? Who is practicing what they study, and
Right.
who is actually embodying it? And so the Tibetan tradition was very accessible in that way. There's just so many living examples of scholar practitioners and yogis, you might say. So
Yeah.
that really kind of locked me in, and
The
so
practical
I did a
element.
lot of that work. Yeah, well, just being able to meet someone, having the idea that I wanted to meet someone face to face who I could talk to from that place. And Bob Thurman was amazing for that. And he was always pointing further to his teachers and to the tradition at large. And so that inspired me to, after I graduated, to go to Nepal and to India, and basically look for a teacher in a 3-year retreat, which for whatever reason, good or bad, seemed to be the thing to do.
Yeah.
um,
Wait. So
before
you
that, I
went.
did a yeah.
Well, I was just going to say. So you went basically straight from university and working with Dr. Thurmond to India, Nepal, looking to do long-term retreat.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's what I was about to say. Before that, I jumped into a Goenka, Vipassana 10-day retreat in California, and that was a very deep confirmation that what I wanted to do was practice, and to really bring, even though in university something had been liberated in my like intellectual mind,
Hmm.
that part was set at peace, and I didn't have those questions anymore. I was at peace with that, but then I could sense the drastic disconnect between the head and the heart, basically, um,
Hmm.
where whatever that might be needs to be translated into the body and into the fullness of oneself, and really the only way to do that is through practice in life. And so I dove into a 10-day retreat, and again that was a deep confirmation that that was the right way to go, it seemed. And so that propelled me even further to look for a more intensive retreat as a way of life. So traveled in India and Nepal, looking for a teacher and a place to do that, and ended up back in New York. And basically jumped into a 3-year retreat. I didn't know the teacher, not much familiarity with the lineage or anything, but it was my hair was kind of on fire at that point with a new type of suffering where the the backdrop of what I knew to be true against what I was feeling, was the contrast of those was becoming even more and more marked, that I was just very desperate to do something, and it seemed like retreat was the thing to do,
Hmm.
and in many ways it was. As soon as I locked in and the doors shut and I got down to business, that's a whole nother world of challenges. But whatever that was burning, was soothed, and I knew that I was in the right place and stayed there, and had no thoughts of leaving or desire to leave at all, until my second retreat. I went in again, probably about the 6th year, the final year, and then I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to get out of here. I still had another like 8 months to go, which was fine, but yeah. And so then, yeah, then I came to Tennessee, where I am now. My teacher, Lama Rinpoche, had some students here, and it was, didn't know whether it was his idea or my idea or both, to build a stupa. So I moved down here to do that, which seemed like a good way of integrating all of that kind of hermit style life with being in the world, relating with people, being in a relationship, building websites, using chainsaws, just doing all this stuff, to really integrate into a full life. And so that was, 14 years ago, and now the stupa is almost complete, and yeah, and at a new moment of transition.
Hmm. Well, that's quite a journey. It's uh it's kind of astonishing to hear. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because so few people in the modern world, I think, even amongst Tibetans, have completed retreats of that kind. And I think one of the things we talked about before that is that I think for people who want to do 3-year retreat, long retreat, intensive practice like this, it's important to know from people like yourself that there are still options out there. There are still teachers out there doing this, and how to say that this isn't just something that was happening in the past. It's something that's still happening right now, and even amongst Westerners, that there's opportunities to do this kind of thing and receive those kinds of instructions. So, yeah, no, it's really
Yeah.
interesting to hear. I hadn't realized, like I said, that you more or less went straight from university into intensive retreat. That's really interesting. I
Hmm.
very nearly did something.
Yeah, and I should say there's, kind of caveat there that, it's not for everyone, and the idea that I have, and which is kind of common, that if you're very serious about a spiritual path, the thing to do if you're drawn to Tibetan Buddhism is to do a 3-year retreat. And that's not necessarily accurate, not only for everyone, but in general. and to really be able, to make use of a traditional three retreat. It takes a type of person that can be an anthropologist at the same time as being someone going through a deep, you know, transformational process, which is meaning learning the language, learning the culture, adopting the customs, while at the same time having a critical gaze on all of that, so that various things are not recapitulated. Various maladaptive cultural things that are not really of service, and also just attitudes towards practice, which are not always healthy for Western bodies and mind. So there's a big, I put a big kind of caveat there about three retreat, but yet in general, the impetus, the inspiration to be drawn to a lifestyle of intensive practice is wonderful. And I think it's just important to not only honor that, but then also have a critical mind about how can that really best be served without fetishizing in this idea of the three retreat or any particular situation, right? So that's just important to say because that word is not always out there.
Yeah, that makes sense as well. I've heard from a few other practitioners who have done quite intensive practice or intensive retreat that yes, at times there are things that can be a bit difficult or problematic. In particular, physically doing that much practice can be extremely difficult, and then that can lead to more problems later on if your body is not working right anymore, and so on and so forth. Which is actually a nice place to transition um, over to one of the other questions that I have. So, when I was doing a bit of sort of digging to get to know you to prepare for this podcast, I realized that in yet another area that I hadn't realized, you and I have another sort of set of passions in common, let's say. Um, I noticed that you teach a fair amount, or at least have a fair amount of information out there associated with you relating to yantra yoga and nangpe yoga. And one of the things that was mentioned on one of your websites somewhere is that you're very interested in the idea of what I might call cultivation happening at the level of the body, the energy system, and the mind as sort of one package of training, or one. You know what I mean? So I was wondering
Mm-hmm.
if you could just share your thoughts on that aspect, the use of the body, the energy system, and the mind instead of just the mind, let's say, which is a much more common approach.
Sure, and there's a few levels to it, and I think the first thing is just to acknowledge that from the standpoint of the tradition, the lineages that I have practiced in most intensively, the Karma Kagyu, Shangpa Kagyu in particular, and the Nyingma, they are yogic lineages, um, at the center of which is either Mahamudra or Dzogchen, and there's teachings on the nature of what we call mind, which seem to be have a kind of cognitive valence in some way or related to mind, but really it's all together: mind, body, breath, energy. The three kayas, you might say. It's actually a comprehensive packaged and approach to, like you said, cultivation, in which what we're glossing as mind includes the whole psychophysical organism, right? And so that being the case, even whatever teachings on the nature of mind one might be receiving, if it's not translated, similar to what I said before, into the heart, into the body as a whole, then not only are they partial, uh, superficial, but lacking transformative power, right? And so the dimension of, the need to say, well, there is a dimension called the body, um, is really something, it seems, that is particularly relevant in the Western context because we have that bias not only to relating with the highest teachings through a cognitive lens, understanding the mind to be something that might not include the body, um, and in general are just disembodied, all of these being interconnected, and that disembodiment kind of accelerating as we go about our ways, the way that things are going. That there's almost two levels of imperative now that ask us to look at the body as a dimension of cultivation. One, just the traditional context as it is, and then the second being our unique situation as modern individuals, where we're navigating degrees of disembodiment, right? And interestingly enough, I think that the tradition doesn't always understand that second dimension of the unique ways in which we as modern individuals need to come into our bodies and become familiar from the inside out with our experience in that somatic way. And a lot of modern teachers have acknowledged that, and really I've been very much inspired by that. And towards the end of my second retreat, started to ask that question. It's like I'm doing so much intensive physical practice. My body is like kind of like burning up like a filament almost. After all of the mantra and the breath retention and yoga, like it's very much body-based practice. But at the same time, it's like what's going wrong here? Like, why is this not working in a certain sense? And you have that question perennially as part of practice until a certain point, because you're in the middle of your own confusion and you can't really see out of it. So you might say, well, is something going wrong? And it's risky to answer that question to the affirmative and then exit. But yet at the same time, something was off, and it was this dimension of the body. And what does it mean to be disembodied and to practice Vajrayana in a disembodied way versus from, like what I'm saying, the inside out, from a somatic perspective. And so that shifted in certain ways, where my practice then explored somatics, you might say, and body-based practice, particularly influenced by people like Reggie Ray. John Wellwood was really helpful. Rob Priest, Tsuknyi Rinpoche has talked about this a lot.
Oh, really? I didn't realize he was into that as well.
Really being yeah, I know he said the same thing. It's like he's teaching nature of mind, and people seem to get it, but it's not touching them. And then he's realizing, his whole shift at a certain point was, and maybe influenced by John Wellwood actually, to start bringing more attention to the heart, and just the goodness of the heart and the warmth of the heart, and bringing nature of mind out of whatever dimension it was into the center of the heart, where it always was supposed to be in some sense. So all of those kinds of observations really hit home for me. And so I started exploring other ways of practicing with the body, not only what you might call somatic meditations, but as you mentioned, other traditions of yoga, which have slightly different tones and kind of qualities of how much effort, how much grace, how much intentionality you're putting into the practice, how instrumental it is, how magical it might be. And so starting to look at, like what you mentioned, the yantra yogas of Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche was really important for me. And then the kind of addendum to that Fabio Andrico has created, called Respira, which is an even more kind of accessible version of that. And then the what's called the Nangpe Yoga, or the inner yogas of the former Kala Rinpoche, that I received from Lama Deni Rinpoche in France. And these being adaptations of the Niguma yogas, and again, very much more gentle and intuitive, and more in the style of an awareness yoga, rather than as a method that you do to get to a result, so that then you can finally practice Mahamudra. It's much more from the beginning, much like Yantra Yoga. Everything is integrated into nature of mind, so there's an inherent gentleness, space, and grace to it. which acknowledges that you're already where you are looking to be, and so whatever
Mm.
you're doing is just kind of for fun, and to be doing something that is beautiful, and that is celebratory rather than as a cause for a result. So those kind of streams of the traditional teachings, their modern adaptations, and modern, more psychotherapeutic, somatic understandings of body and mind, bringing those together in a way and having them meet in various ways, as a not only a way for me to bridge whatever gaps had been left in my own practice, but
Mm.
then also very much to translate the traditional teachings to students, to be able to meet people where they're at, because the gap is so much even more between doing something like the yogas of Naropa and meeting someone where they're at with whatever they're feeling or not feeling in their body and mind. Like
Mm.
there's a lot of distance there that needs to be bridged. And so a lot of those other aspects were, were introduced and came out because of the need to be able to speak to people and meet them where they're at. So
Mm.
it's a personal thing and it's a communal thing, and but yeah, and so now the way that I teach is very much all of that together, depending on circumstance. The Niguma yogas, the Naropa yogas, Nangpa yoga, Yantra yoga, it's all good, and it depends on where someone's at and what they might need.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Really fascinating to hear. I've gone on a bit of a similar arc in my own sort of work. I mean, getting a PhD, and throughout the PhD, I actually encountered a Taoist lineage, and they have many similar practices to the ones you find in Tibetan Tantra, and and similarly, sort of like you were saying, they have that whole spectrum of, well, you could do it like this, which is much more like the nature of mind, let's say, in terms of what you're doing to get the result, so to speak. It's more about trying to just get to a place where you're being instead of doing,
Mm.
which is different than the approaches where it's like, well, you're missing this, and because of that, you're not quite strong enough to just be here. So let's give you one more tool before you try,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or
Yeah, no,
if you
for sure.
if you started playing around now, you'd probably hurt yourself and hurt other people. So before we just make it completely free, let's give you a couple more a couple more little tools. And so it's interesting because I've gone down a very similar road, and I don't teach very much of those things myself, but I recently partnered with a gentleman who's very, very capable in those arts, um, qigong, neigong, the Chinese health arts, and so forth, for a very similar reason, I think, which is that doing those things gives you so much more ability to discover what you actually are. You know what I mean? In a way that's quite difficult, I think, if you're just working with the mind only.
Sure, which is the etymology of Naljor, right? The Tibetan translation of yoga. That the Nyama, the natural, the innate, and Jorwa, either joining with that, or the inherent wealth of that, acknowledging that which is already and always one's own nature, is yoga, right? Being
Hmm.
able to join with that, acknowledge that, celebrate that. Um, Much different thing, than something more instrumental.
Yeah, yeah, very well said. Very well said. And that, I think, is also maybe a nice place to tie into this, because I'm sure uh, not only the people that are here, but the people who eventually watch this over the web or see clips of it and so forth will be curious. There's quite a bit of strange information around about what Tantra is and what it involves and what it doesn't involve and so forth. And so, as a person who's spent a fair amount of time doing those practices, let's say, I was wondering if you could provide your definition for tantra and what you think it's all about, and maybe even what you think it's not about.
The elevator pitch on Tantra. Um, sure. And it's always relative to who's asking, right? Especially with the nature of mind, but Tantra by extension. Someone asks, well, what is it? Well, it isn't something necessarily that's independent of the person asking the question, because the question is coming from their own dimension, their own continuity, their own body mind, right? And so to be able to meet that means a relationship right off the bat. And that relationship is personal. It's not something that can be translated objectively, meaning it's not going to be the same answer for everyone. And yet, of course, if we're to look at, the foundational writings, for me, it's primarily through Jamgon Kongtrul and Rinpoche, and the teachings on the Treasury of Knowledge, where most of what I've learned about Tantra, again, about it, rather than from within relationship, from within the tradition itself. The more theoretical knowledge comes from him, and in that way of answering, where if you were to read about it in a book, in other words, Tantra is really about, literally, it's in the Tibetan at least, is translating continuity, Ju, and that continuity is threefold. There is what's called the continuity of the basis, that of the path, and that of the fruit. And when you're speaking of Tantra, much like many other practice traditions that are, call it fruitional, non-dual, various ways of characterizing them, which are more or less accurate. The thing about it is that the ground, who you are fundamentally, what reality is essentially, is the very thing that you discover as the result. So there's a circularity kind of built into what Tantra is, meaning whatever practice you do is actually to come back to what is already there, who you already are. And there's divergence about how much is it fruitional, how much is it causal? How much do you really need to do something? Is Buddhahood, Buddha nature, already realized and just overlooked, or is it something that needs to be watered, fed, actualized, cultivated, and that grows into a fruitional state? There's debate about that, and that kind of spectrum is what gives the tantric landscape its variability, and makes it very interesting and cool, because there's no easy answer there. And again, the way that comes about in practice will be through your own relationship. If you doubt yourself on some level, then your teacher's going to tell you, well, you should do this thing and see how it works. And if you're like doing this thing and you're just hitting your head against the wall for so long, maybe your teacher's going to tell you, stop doing that and just rest in what you already are. And so you kind of move and weave between these kind of extremes of approaches. But in general, the ground is, you become familiar with the ground on the path, and the result is the full fruition and knowledge of the ground, right? And so that's more of a objective view of what Tantra is. But then in practice, like I started with, it's nothing other than the way that your own, again, I think a lot of Buddhist Tantras can be seen to be based in the Buddha nature teachings in various ways. But your own Buddha nature, how do you relate with that? The continuity of that, sort of beginning as lives, previous lives, and the fruition of that Buddha nature into Buddhahood, where that actually becomes fully actualized and realized. How do you go about that? Well, the from the standpoint of the tradition, it's going to happen eventually, no matter what. But in order to expedite that, the most expedient means is through relating with someone who has already actualized that, who is a living example that you can uh, be with, relate to, talk to, see face to face, receive instruction from, who is speaking from the far side of that nature, which is your nature, which is their nature, which is Buddha nature. And so, whatever Tantra is, there's so many different dimensions: mudra, mantra, mandala, creation, completion, all the yogas, all that stuff. These are all just kind of uh, symptoms of tantric practice. They don't define it. They're prescriptions that are given relative to a particular student from a particular teacher. And so for one student, maybe they would, like Milarepa, for instance, would generally just start students off straight into Tumo and the yogas. Just jump straight into the deep end of yogic practice.
Yeah.
Others, like Gampopa, he might have a more gradual path of practicing the paramitas, bodhisattva yana kind of practice, which seems like it's not tantra, but because it's coming through that relationship, is permeated with what we call blessing and the attentiveness of that student-teacher relationship that is maturing someone in a particular way. So then the path is undefined. It could be anything. It seems like if you zoom out and ask an LLM what is tantra, it will give you a whole bunch of deep information.
The
But
Gemini
actually,
summary.
those are all just symptoms. Yeah, the Gemini summary of tantra is very is deceptive in a way because it is a symptom rather than the actuality. And the actuality is a dynamic, unfolding conversation between a student and a teacher, which can't be predefined because it's relational. It's in the moment. It comes out of whatever might be happening circumstantially. And that, I think, is a much more genuine understanding of what Tantra is. And in that sense, there's not much to say about it. It's more like you have to just see how does it unfold.
Well, that's gets into another issue we spoke a bit about when I first asked you to potentially be on the podcast, which is there are quite a few opinions nowadays that really all you need is a book and a few videos online and maybe I don't know, that if you want to do all this, all of the traditional structures and teachers and authorities on everything aren't really needed actually. And I was wondering if you might, in light of what you said a moment ago and what we talked about previously, if you might weigh in on that.
Well, we're always bootstrapping. And even in a relationship with a teacher, there's like there are a lot of unknowns, right? And for instance, what I was sharing with my 3 retreat, it seems like, again, going into it, it's like, oh, this is comprehensive. It's going to give me everything I need. And if I just do it well, do it thoroughly, do it right, I'll end up where I want to be. And it's actually very messy. It's not straightforward at all. And the relationships also twists and turns and dips and peaks, and it's all over. It's very messy. So we can never fully abdicate the responsibility for our own path, in a sense, and the need to have the kind of courage and the flexibility, dexterity, cleverness to explore and to run experiments. It never goes away. And if it were to, then you would just be cultivating a kind of infantile dependency anyway. So the question is how to encourage critical mind, ingenuity, risk taking, whatever it might be, in the same time as being able to have commitment, loyalty, um, diligence, and so forth. And so the question is not one-sided, in short. And you, of course, you can go to either extreme, right? And especially in this day and age, the rules are changing also pretty rapidly. So it's hard to know what the rules are anymore. So it's hard to know what to do and not to do. Um, and so I very much respect the paths of psychonauts and those who are willing to do their own work, even if it means reinventing the wheel because they don't see any other alternative. They can't sign on to the options that they have available, traditional or otherwise, or whatever it might be. So it's all okay. But yet, if in that whole search, the the kind of acknowledgement that there are living Buddhas that you can meet face to face is not present, then it's a much more desperate situation. Um, because fruition is therefore by definition transcendental. It's beyond. It's something that you have to get to if you can, if you have the right stuff, right? Um, but if Buddhahood is a reality that you can actually know face to face, that is instantiated in human form, seemingly human form, that's a game changer, because then whatever like psychonautic experimentation you might be doing is in that context, and relative to that reality, and that changes things drastically. Um, so not everybody has that confidence, and not everybody has the fortune of having met someone like that. And so it's really hard to judge, right? But at the end of the day, I can't really say much more than, um, for me, that is a reality, and it changes everything. Being able to meet a Buddha, say, Buddhas are a real thing, not just a transcendental thing, and not just something that you need to take a heroic dose of psychedelics to encounter or whatever it might be. It's a totally everyday thing that you can find. You know, the head of the Drikung, His Holiness Chetson Rinpoche, was flipping burgers at I think it was a Burger King in Texas for many years and early on. Like these are people who are around, and you can meet them, and it's not
Yeah.
particularly esoteric, right?
No, it's
So again, there's a lot of backstory to that question,
mm,
but in general, we're always going to be moving from either a kind of adolescent rebellion, I'm going to do it myself, to an infantile dependency, you know best, I'm going to do whatever you say, and you can't get stuck in either.
mm.
That's probably the easiest way to answer it.
No, I think that's a good answer. A very mature answer. I think I will leave it at that without adding my. Well, they get to hear my thoughts on this stuff all the time, especially on this channel. Uh, but in brief, I agree. I think that's a very mature attitude. You know. So something else that comes up quite often, just to cover a little bit more basic ground, pun intended, is in your view, in your experience, dare I say, how would you define Rigpa or clear light, which is the subject of, to transition over a bit, at least in terms of the name, one of the practices that you have coined and now teach, clear light mindfulness?
There's a wonderful wisdom podcast that came out recently with Eva Natanya, where she talks about when she met her teacher, Alan Wallace, and she was deep in the scholastic land of the Gelugpa, studying Guhya Samaja and the completion stages, which Guhya Samaja is particularly related to clear light yoga. And at the time she met Alan Wallace, he was teaching Dzogchen, and she asked him, what's the difference between Rigpa and Osa, clear light? And if you're interested, you can listen to that podcast because I can't do it justice. But really wonderful way of introducing both distinction and a bridge between the very traditional completion stage yogas of Tantra and the teachings of the Great Perfection. So the cheeky way of answering is that I try not to answer, try not to talk about
Try
it.
not to talk about it.
And that
You're gonna
try
do
not
the
to talk about it,
volunteer
and
answer.
that well, no, I mean this is just a sort of disclaimer, but and the reason why is not just that it's beyond my pay grade or that it's something very sacred, but that more so it is the most intimate conversation that can happen between a student and a teacher. And just in the way that we don't, we could, but if we were to share our intimate conversations with our intimate partner, with the world at large, it would seem a little bit strange for many reasons. But mostly because it's kind of category error. It's not the right context.
Right.
And if you were to talk about it, then you could say it diminishes the sacred nature, and so that's true. But really, it's just like it doesn't make sense. It's not the time and the place, right?
Okay, fair enough.
So that needs to be said, and at the same time, yeah. So with clear light, at a certain point, we talked about this before. I needed to make money basically. I was like, okay, now I had this like Lama training. I do this stuff that is basically in a monastic kind of mode, but now I have a relationship, and then later on had a child, and I needed to like make my expertise relevant to normal people outside of the very esoteric traditional context. And how to do that? Well, at that time, mindfulness was happening, and that was interesting in many ways, and a wild west in others. And in order to distinguish what I wanted to teach in terms of mindfulness from the vast majority of mindfulness teachings, I thought of calling it clear light mindfulness, indicating this quote from the Prajnaparamita Sutras: "Mind, there is no mind. Mind's nature is Osa, luminous clarity, clear light," and that these three statements correlate in the teachings of Jamgon Chense Chökyi Lodro. He talks about how these three statements correlate to three turnings of the wheel of Dharma: mind, mindfulness, all of what's out there. The mindfulness teachings, mindfulness movement is about understanding mind, and from a more psychological perspective, breaking it down into parts, seeing how it becomes afflicted, how it can become liberated, how does it get stuck, all that stuff. More Abhidharma kind of level of like what is mind, or knowing mind, right? And then there is no mind. Mindfulness in general didn't really, except in very limited cases, actually ask, well, who is being mindful? Or what is this mind that we are mindful of? What is mind? Like really asking what is mind, and using mind to know mind. Then you move into the teachings on emptiness, Prajnaparamita, second turning, all that stuff. And so that could be a really interesting territory for mindfulness also. But then the third statement, mind's nature is limitless clarity. This is the Buddha nature teachings. And so I wanted to anchor what I was presenting in that context that is transcends and includes these previous two contexts of mind, there is no mind, and so forth, but goes deeper and has a little bit more flexibility, basically, and can also therefore integrate aspects of tantric teaching and subtle body understanding, all that stuff. So it was more of a moniker, right? And something that pointed to that depth, rather than talking about clear light either as a yoga or as this kind of resultant state of dissolution or as Rigpa, but yet informed by all of that, right? Um, and then at a certain point, uh, with all of the virtual reality work,
Oh
what
yeah,
we were
please do.
doing, yeah,
Go
well,
ahead,
what we were
introduce that a
doing,
bit,
okay.
because nobody knows besides the little bit in the description.
I mean, I can just jump into the in midstream. So we had designed a friend of mine had designed a program, a multi-person virtual reality environment based on his near-death experience, the aesthetic based on his near-death experience. That was a kind of celebration of embodiment as energy, and was the way that he saw his body as in an out-of-body experience. As he was dying. He didn't die, but it inspired a number of art projects to represent that. And that got a lot of attention because he's a scientist and a designer. And it got a lot of attention because after a study, he was showing that on a number of metrics, the according to what's called the Mystical Experiences Questionnaire, the results of that were similar to medium to high doses of psilocybin. It's a psychedelic experience, and so that had a lot of attention in the MIT Tech Review and in Nature. It was widely read after that paper was published, and then I was brought on to design a contemplative practice in that same environment.
Hmm.
And after that, because of we put probably more than 1,000 people through that, and a lot of people had just intimations of, well, dissolution for sure, but of death in many ways. And so we, at a certain point, pivoted and said, well, what if we just design for preparing for death? What if we design a multi-person virtual reality, very minimalistic, impressionistic, energy-based aesthetic, we call pneumodelic aesthetic, to help people to relate with their own mortality, whether they have a terminal diagnosis or not. Like, how can this be relevant? And so, in the development of that program, which is 6 sessions long, quite extensive, we came up with the name Clear Light because in the tantric teachings of death, there is a very direct overlap between Clear Light Yoga, which is the yoga of deep sleep, the state of recognizing the luminosity of deep sleep, and Bardo Yoga, the yoga of dying, what happens after you die. There's a very direct overlap and connection between those, and what's called the Bardo of Dharmata, where everything dissolves. The elements of your body, the constituents of your mind, all progressively dissolve into the ground, which is called clear light. And the same thing happens every night. And so if you're familiar with that dissolution process, then you can rest in deep sleep with full awareness. And training in that allows you then at the time of death to proceed without fear because you already know where it's going in a sense. And so we took that premise of how to relate with dissolution as preparation for mortality. And so we did a trial of that, and now this fall we've translated everything into Spanish. We're doing a randomized controlled trial in Spain with cancer patients, and all of that is really wonderful and promising. So again, all of this is to say are ways that I have avoided defining clear light, let alone Rigpa.
That's fine. I'll let you dodge the question for all the reasons you already mentioned.
Hmm.
uh, okay. Let me see if there's anything else I'd like to get sort of people's juices flowing with, and then we'll turn over to questions. You know, some of the questions that I have are, I don't know, they're sort of, well, maybe I'll just give it a go. But you let me know if you think it's a little bit too sort of not the right flavor. I'm just wondering, you know, have you part of the reason that I am doing this podcast is that I have a passion. I don't know where it comes from, but I've had it more or less from the very early stages of doing this, of trying to figure out how to help people that basically aren't going to become monks and nuns and probably aren't going to do 3-year retreat and so forth, to really do this in some form, for lack of better ways of talking about it. Um, and I'm just wondering if you might offer any advice for a general audience that is kind of in line with this. You know, after having done intensive practice, having done living in the real world, being married, having a family, blah blah blah. What would you recommend for people in sort of general terms, in terms of training and how do I say this? I think you know what I mean. But
What to do? Yeah.
yeah, what do you actually do? If you're
When,
serious, what do you actually do so that you're not just
mhm.
sort of like, oh yeah, I light incense and I do this and then I just run over old ladies and Boy Scouts and that's my practice, you know? You know, like what do you do?
Mhm. Yeah, the seriousness is the double-edged sword, right?
Mm,
But one thing that I really appreciate and draw from a lot are the words of Zunta Khensen Rinpoche, when in many contexts he's talked about how the longing for practice, the part of you that says I should be practicing,
mm,
how I wish I could do a retreat, or even how I wish I could become a monk or a nun, even if that preconception is faulty in whatever way, inaccurate. The longing itself is genuine, um, and whether that's a lifetime longing or a longing in the moment, where you're in the middle of a job that you hate, and you say, "Oh, how I wish I could be following a spiritual path."
yeah.
That is not this, right? And again, it's kind of going to be mixed in various ways, but the longing itself is genuine, and if you can shift to the longing, to privilege the longing without the need for the result, that the longing is itself fruitional, and if you can feel that in your body, and when you and the distinction here is, what does it mean to shift into the longing? Well, to really maybe stop, to pause, or to just allow that longing to immolate everything, to just become as large as everything else that might be around you, and
Mm,
to sit in the middle of it in whatever extent it is unrequitable or unfulfilled. To that extent, it burns more brightly and more with more warmth. And to be in that, then you are that, and that is enough. And the more that you're able to do that, the more that will then translate into tangible situations in the poetics of your experience that show up as opportunities, as shifts away from repetitive behaviors, away from meaningless engagements,
mm,
to things that are more deeply meaningful. And so, really, it all boils down to that longing. And that longing is also bodhicitta to
Mm.
whatever extent you can recognize that.
Yeah.
Um, it is devotion and it is compassion, but in a very practical way, the thought that we have, oh, I wish I had more time to practice.
Mm.
Stop right there, refine the essence of the longing out of that moment. Focus on that essence and allow it to be the totality of what you are, even just for a few breaths. And that is very good practice.
Mm.
And that is as good as any other practice.
Mm.
And then in time, be intelligent about shifting circumstance to align with that more fully, to feed that more reliably.
Mm.
Um, and so that's more like essential level, right? But then on the level of, well, what okay, I'm doing that and I still need more, right? Like it's not enough in some sense. Well,
Yeah. Now I really want it. Now what? Now what
yeah,
do I do?
no, 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 right, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's nothing, there's not going to be any news, but at the same time, connecting with a teacher
Mm.
and a lineage that that sets that longing ablaze, that says, oh, this is the home for this. This is what I have been longing for. Finding that relationship.
Mm.
And then after that, you just carry on. There's no prescriptions anymore, as we talked about before. Prescriptions come out of that relationship. And you stay in good relationship and you navigate that. That's the, again, because I'm speaking from the context of Tantra, that's what I know. I'm sure there's other ways of doing it. The longing won't go away. The longing won't change relative to spiritual contexts, paths, and so forth. It's bodhicitta is always bodhicitta, and there isn't anything more, and there's no point in anything less. But at the same time, um, different paths for different people. But in the context of Vajrayana, well, yeah, then you need to find a lineage and a teacher, and then see what happens as you go. And it's fraught. There's no guarantees, and it's not easy.
Mm.
But yeah, is that helpful?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, the audience will say it's helpful to me, certainly. you know.
Even just the reassurance that you can give to yourself that the longing is enough
Mm.
makes a big difference because you're no longer resisting the resistance, as Trungpa Rinpoche put it. No,
Mm.
you're resisting your life. You want something else, but then like you get caught up in that resistance instead of shifting to the longing. You're recapitulating that and reinscribing that same kind of distortion with resentment or whatever it might be. And so that whole piece you can unplug that and liberate
Mm.
that. And as soon as you do, then actually there's a lot more resources available to actually relate with circumstance in an intelligent way. So
Yeah.
that it's very practical actually, and really can make a big difference.
For those of you who do some of the training that I teach, I think what you're describing is what I put under the rubric of rumination meditation. And it's really interesting the way that you broke it down in saying, okay, you have this desire, basically to, lack of a better term, do real practice of some kind, to find more meaning. Let's to be even more general, to find real meaning and purpose. And then instead of marinating in that with as much focus as you can and just letting it be and letting it grow until it produces something or takes you somewhere. Instead, I think what I hear you saying is, well, quite a few people, and I know some people like this, and I've had periods of time like this, and probably still will at various times. You instead sit and focus on, oh well, I hate this circumstance because I can't do this desire, what this desire wants, and I really resent that I have to do all this instead of just marinating in the desire for the other thing, which will create the transformation that ultimately leads somewhere else. So I think that's a fantastic answer. Uh, I hope some other people hear it
Mm-hmm.
and agree. But yeah, that's very profound. It's also really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard many people talk about the connection between basically renunciation and bodhicitta in the way that you have, besides one of my really, really important teachers. And it's really nice hearing it from a living practitioner again, because I haven't heard it in like 7
How do
years.
you mean? Or like what? How do you connect renunciation and bodhicitta? What do you mean?
Well, he used to say,
I agree, but but yeah, what? How do you see?
he used to say, for example, renunciation is doing the next right thing for self, and bodhicitta is doing the next right thing for the whole circumstance, and not some intellectualized right thing, just abiding in the nature of consciousness, completely interdependent with the circumstance, with the ordinary sense of self out of the way, and doing what comes out of getting as much of your normal BS out of the way as you can. That's bodhicitta,
Mm-hmm.
because you're
Mm-hmm.
taking into account the needs of the entire circumstance, not just this part. And when you do just sort of zoom in on this part and you get a bunch of stuff out of the way, that's closer to renunciation, right? Because you're doing it to
Mm-hmm.
take yourself further down the path. When you do it for the whole circumstance, now it's bodhicitta. But this is more
Mm-hmm.
sort of coming out of a Mahamudra style approach. But again, I've never heard another sort of stream of teachings talk about it in quite that way. So it's really interesting that you
Mm-hmm.
somehow you have that transmission from somewhere too. I don't know where he
Yeah,
got
well,
it.
it's just yeah. Well,
Hmm.
everything is bodhicitta, so then you just look at whatever else is you're trying to connect with. But yeah, for sure, renunciation. Yeah.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
say a little more about that point. I think that'd be really interesting. And then I can't be selfish. I have to turn it over to other things that people would like to know in the audience. So when you say everything is bodhicitta, tell me a bit more what you
Yeah.
mean.
It's something that I've been exploring recently in leading practice is what I've been presenting as a kind of threefold dimensions of bodhicitta. So bodhicitta, if people aren't familiar, is in a kind of conceptual Mahayana framework, the wish for the awakening of all beings to Buddhahood, including oneself, the full fruition of the Buddha nature of all beings, including oneself. So there's that wish, and then actually putting it into practice. And then there is the resting in the always and already nature of bodhicitta. And so those, two truths podcasts, right? So we have these two things that seemingly are, that need to be bridged in some way. The wishing and the doing, and the always, the already, the relative and the ultimate, right? And so then our path weaves between these, and in the Mahayana, we try to bring them together. We alternate, periods of resting, trying to recognize in periods of application and aspiration, and we're trying to do something, right?
Hmm.
And the path proceeds through with those as the kind of guardrails that give us the direction of practice. And generally, there's a kind of conceptual aspect to that, effortful aspect, and then there's the release of effort, right? And so that's all there. That's all wonderful and important. But then in the Vajrayana, bodhicitta is translated into the body, and the body becomes bodhicitta, the body of the deity, the body of the Buddha. Now, not only do you have bodhicitta instantiated as kind of physical coalescences of mind and body in the body, as we call them bindu or bodhicitta drops, but also all of the practices that you're doing is to move, to blend, to mix, to rub, to awaken, to celebrate that the dance of opposites in the body of the relative and the ultimate. And this is, we can't go down the rabbit hole of tantric theory too much, but what is it like to have bodhicitta in the body? even in just a simple movement or a moment of breath retention, of integration, of joining, dissolution, bringing aspects of bodhicitta into union and dissolution. So bodhicitta now becomes a path of embodied expression, and you can very easily, in that path, at any given moment, kind of check, like conceptually, how is this related to the awakening of all beings? It's like, oh, it's totally obvious. I can't fill in that gap for you, but it's an experiential apparentness that is very palpable. Like, oh, this is bodhicitta. This is how it lives in my body and in my experience. And that segues very directly into bodhicitta as awareness, which we talked about early on today. And particularly in the Dzogchen teachings, there's three, called the three categories, Daesum of Dzogchen. And in the first, which is usually translated as the mind class, Semde, the full name is actually Jantrup Semde, Bodhicitta class. And this aspect of the Dzogchen teachings is about the nature of mind. Very similar to Mahamudra in many ways. Looking at nature of mind, knowing it, being introduced to it, and familiarizing yourself with it. And so coming from the Mahayana aspect of bodhicitta into the Vajrayana embodied reality experience of bodhicitta as body-mind into nature of mind, there's a through line, and you can see that it's all bodhicitta, and it ends there. If you look at the Rinpoche Chuingzo of Longchenpa, the jewel treasury of the Dharmadhatu, every chapter is about bodhicitta. Almost like the headings of each chapter. It's all about the nature of reality itself as the sphere of bodhicitta, which I would say includes all of those dimensions, but is in itself essentially empty, yet radiant and manifesting in forms that benefit beings through beauty, through excellence, through meeting them where they're at, and helping them to open to reality itself. So that is it is the essence and nature of everything, bodhicitta. So anything can be connected to it because it's at the middle of everything. And our job as practitioners is to keep it in the middle of everything and not like get it over with in the beginning of the sadhana or whatever, but continually check back, like, well, how is this in my body? How is this related to the notion of the awakening of all beings? And then seeing, oh, maybe what I'm doing is not really acknowledging that, and then bringing it back in various ways to embodiment and to that aspiration. So that's one way of answering.
No, that's quite interesting. I have a feeling I'm going to be sending you some emails later on asking you questions about this. Okay, well, let me start pulling up some questions. If you're comfortable with that, we can get going on some of the questions that people have in the chat. And just so that you know, there's a little bit of lag happening on the stream, so some of the questions may be a bit slow in coming, but let me remind the stream, if you're hearing this, even if the stream is choppy, it's being recorded, it'll be re-uploaded, and so if you are having trouble hearing the answer right at the moment, it'll be quite clear when it's re-uploaded from the desktop version. So let me just make sure that all right, let me see. So here's a good question from Jay. Jay has been one of my students for a couple months, and he's also trained in Goenka for quite some time now. He says, what's the best way to be engaged in a lineage if you don't live near any physical instantiation, a meeting place, community, etc., of that lineage? Should you go with whatever lineages or just happen to be nearby?
Yeah, there's a great image from the Dzogchen teachings that says, in the beginning of your path, be like a bee that goes from flower to flower. Shop around, basically. You know, yeah, go local and go online and all of the above, right? So travel, do whatever you can. It's all fine. And then the next the follow up to that is to be like a wounded deer that retreats into solitude to heal. So once you have a connection with the lineage and you've received what you need, then integrate. You know, you don't need to travel and shop around anymore. And then I forget the third is like be like a lion without fear and regard for anything or something. I don't remember, but that's the state of fruition. Then you don't need to be reclusive anymore once you've integrated in practice. But yeah, that's I think in the beginning, do everything you can. Sometimes your teacher is going to be online. Sometimes they might be right down the road. You just can't know, so you just try everything.
Thank you very much for that. Another one from Jay. Would you say that the path could be conceptualized heuristically as becoming what you already are?
Yeah, Journey is the Goal. You can read that book from Trungpa Rinpoche. It has the same premise. In general, spiritual paths can be characterized as either um, cause-based or fruitional. And this is a really important distinction to make right off the bat, that is what you're being presented in a way where you are creating the conditions for a result, or does it in whatever way, small or direct way, acknowledge that the result is ever present? And so these are much different ways of approaching the spiritual path. And certain people need one or the other. It's relative to what your preconceptions are. But yeah, in that latter version, that's one way of, it's a heuristic, sure. Yeah.
There's actually one more thing I'd like to jump in with that's related to what you were saying. When we first spoke, I had sort of asked a couple of times, "What do you think the best practice is for lay people?" Something like this, and you hit on this point of creativity and play in your practice, and I'm wondering if you might, if you remember that bit of that conversation, if you might sort of recount that description as best you could of the importance
Mm-hmm.
of, because on the one hand, of course, I mean, you know much better than most that there's a certain amount of serious hard work, let's say, that must be put into what you're doing. But then there's also this other aspect that isn't talked about as much, especially in the Tibetan circles, at least the ones that I've been in. You do find it a bit in the Taoist circles and some other places, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and then we'll go back to audience questions.
Yeah, and I think it really it's pretty related to what we just talked about. And for me, starting in a Karma Kaju lineage, really bread and butter approach, ground up. You just start by digging a hole in the ground and then creating a foundation and then building from there. It's like really, uh, um, like effort based and engaged and no nonsense, put it that way. And then at a certain point, I met another of my teachers, Chogyal Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche, and his approach and the worldwide Dzogchen community that he created was much different, where at the center of it was direct transmission. So transmission into what he called Ati Guru Yoga, direct transmission, nature of mind, however you want to call it. And then everything else was derivative. You that's the center. And then if you are a yogic type, you do yantra. If you want to do the Vajra dance, you do that. You can do the kaita dancing. You can take the more scholastic approach. Um, and there was just so many, or you can do a Vajrayana thing. You can do Nindra. You can do all these things. They're all options. And if if the thing is if the main thing is the main thing, then it opens up a field of possibility around that thing where it can be integrated and instantiated in many different ways, in unending different ways, which is a huge relief. First of all, it's like suddenly the space is totally open. Possibility. Bob Thurman used to talk about the infinite horizon of possibility that emptiness affords. So suddenly now you have that horizon available to you, and you can choose and play. You can do whatever integration practice you do out of inspiration rather than duty or a very narrow kind of prescription, because there's something in you that needs to be improved or discarded. You need to do this accumulation or purification practice. That still applies, but now it's very playful, and you can accumulate and purify while enjoying. One of Namkhai Rinpoche's famous statements was, "Enjoying forever." So that spirit of playfulness and creativity comes from that source, as opposed to the caprice of individual sentiment. I am going to be playful because I'm entitled to it, or whatever it might be, or because that's what it is. You know, there's lots of justifications for being innovative, playful, experimental, whatever it might be. But if you're not grounded in the source, then there's always a shadow to it, right? And it's always going to come back to you, which is many artists. It's a perennial thing with artistic creation. Where is it coming from? So then, what's the flip side, right? So yeah, creativity is the ideal expression of the path, and is also the way that fruition presents itself. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I hope some other folks in the chat also get something out of this. This is something, I mean, maybe you've detected from our first couple of conversations that I was more on the hardcore kind of prescriptive side for a long time. And really it took training in the Chinese arts and meeting a Taoist practitioner. And by the way, I don't know how much time you spent talking to Taoists, but the Taoists are hilarious. Because in China, they just spent centuries making fun of how hardcore the Buddhists were. And they were like, you know, they have all these jokes that are amazing. So he's just constantly ripping into me. And yeah, I mean, one of their things is sort of like you said, is like, no, you start with the central thing. And then if you have to add these other things on because of your predisposition or this or that, you do that. But the central thing is the thing. And wouldn't it be better if you enjoyed it along the way instead of... There's this really funny joke. There's a Confucian, a Buddhist, and a Taoist, and they're all staring at a mountain. And they say, okay, let's climb this mountain. And the Confucian says, great. And he immediately starts a research program and spends 4 years at the bottom cataloging everything he can see and all this. And the Taoist just starts sort of like, looks at the mountain and goes, that looks like a good place, and just starts sort of climbing. And when he finds a nice little spot with a good view, he's like, this is cool, I'll hang out here for a while, and this cave looks nice, I'll hang out here. And he's making his way up, but he's going up. And then the Buddhist kind of goes like this and walks straight from where he is over every bit of ice, every mountain, every crevasse, straight to the top. Anyways, so this is like one of the ways the Taoists make fun of the Buddhists in China.
Yeah, the Zen, that's kind of a Zen attitude, yeah.
Yeah, like you could have had a nice stroll up to the top and still gotten there, because you are already that. It's like you could have just had a nice walk. Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay, here's an interesting sort of technical question while we're on the subject of technical questions. So, Pan asks, if positive karma is still karma, should it also be eliminated in order to eliminate all karma?
Yeah, so there's and again, to quote Zanzar Khyentse Rinpoche, quoting Chandrakirti, um, he says that the foolish people do negative things, negative actions, and are reborn in hell as a result of those negative actions. And foolish people do positive actions and are reborn in heaven. But the wise go beyond action and attain nirvana. So, wisdom is something that transcends morality, you might say it that way. That Shila is in the back seat and wisdom is in the driver's seat. And as a result, we take refuge not only from our own afflictions and the faults of samsara, but we also take refuge from nirvana, from attaining that kind of a goal. And so those are two different quotes that he has that are a little bit at odds. So in the first, it shows that both positive and negative action are still within the realm of karma and therefore have results and don't directly lead to the result of cessation, right? But so that's important to realize, yes. So that the answer is yes to the question. But and the second thing is, well, cessation is not the goal either. We're taking refuge from samsara, but also from nirvana. And so, what does it mean to take refuge from nirvana? Well, it means that you just dive back into the world of action, and sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. But from the standpoint of wisdom, whatever it might be, is free. So this is kind of a little bit of nuance there. I hope that's clear. So the straight answer is yes, but there's the caveat of non-duality. Like we were saying, Vimalakirti, the way that Vimalakirti as an embodiment of the Bodhisattva is totally in the world of business and,
Everything
friends
else.
with prostitutes and all this stuff. Like, it's like he's in the thick of it, right? But at the same time is not bound by it.
Carrying on with questions in the chat. Let's see. Luck108 says, I'm not sure which Lama, but he says a Lama said that Drikong Chetsong Rinpoche is a Buddha, and asks your opinion on this. Or asks you to expand on it.
Yeah, so I forget, I think it might be Nagarjuna, I forget who says, if you relate with your teacher as a human being, you'll receive the blessing, their blessing of, their help, their assistance, their insight, whatever it might be. If you relate to them as a bodhisattva, then you receive that level of insight from them, the blessing, the insight of a bodhisattva. And if you relate to a being as a Buddha, then you receive the blessing of a Buddha, which is knowing your own awareness to be Buddha, because you have related to another as a Buddha. And then, by extension, you can relate to other Buddhas as Buddhas, your intimate partner, your children, on and on. And so, again, no, I don't have a relationship with Setsun Rinpoche I met him, but I don't have that kind of relationship. But I, I I have met Buddhas, so I know that it's totally reasonable to relate with beings as Buddhas and receive the blessing of the Buddhas. Um, so it's more of a question. Again, it's about the relationship rather than the identity. For me to say this or that about this or that person misses the point. But hopefully that answer helps to contextualize it.
Yeah, yeah.
I mentioned him because he spent years flipping burgers, and he's like a consummate scholar. I can tell you that. Like he's an amazing scholar, and his holiness is the head, one of the two heads of the Drikung lineage, and is widely respected and so forth. But I mentioned him because of that.
It actually reminds me of another story, and I can't remember what Lama it was, but there's a reincarnate Tulku during the initial diaspora that was sort of misplaced, let's say. They didn't know where he had gone, and then years passed, something like a decade, and they had his little hut there at Sera Monastery or something, and some of his students happened to be walking down a road in India and saw like a road gang of people digging a ditch on the side of the road, and there he was. And they were like, Rinpoche, what are you doing? And he was like, he just goes, as sort of sometimes great beings, they have that aspect. He just goes, digging a ditch on the side of the road, living in a monastery, no difference. Okay. I hope some of this will make sense to people, but yeah. I find these stories quite charming.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are you still doing okay on time, Lama?
Yeah, yeah, we can
Okay.
go till another 20 minutes if you need.
Okay. All right. Okay, so Simple Light asks, is letting go of attachment to positive or pleasant mental states an important milestone? Where would that stand within the stages of awakening?
Yeah, well, even not even, of course, just fundamentally, um, the from the fundamental teachings of the Buddha, we have attachment to existence and we have attachment to non-existence, and these are form that basic root that keeps us circling in samsara, and positive circumstances are obviously part of that. And it may be positive to have nothing, to be relieved. Oblivion might be a positive circumstance, or bliss or whatever we normally associate with positive. But yeah, they can go positive or negative. But from a more profound dimension, and you find this in Paltru Rinpoche's commentary on the three words of Garab Dorje, where he talks about how, in the context of meditating on nature of mind, when you have stabilized recognition, it's imperative to destroy the meditation. And he gives a particular prescription of how to do that. But even when you feel like you've arrived, you cut through it and destroy it. To keep nimble and to keep a type of responsiveness, a dynamic responsiveness that doesn't land in any kind of cozy confirmation of arriving, in any kind of finality. So yeah, even letting go of that, letting go of the result, basically.
Wow. That's I'd really love to hear more about that. There are a number of questions, so I do think we have to carry on. But I think it's probably worth saying a bit more about that, because that's one of the most important streams of teachings. I think whether you're talking about Chan, Zen, the later stages of tantric practice, and even a number of non-Buddhist practices have this idea. I'm not quite sure how to form the question, but could you share more of your thoughts on that aspect of training related to sort of letting go of the goals, letting go of doing, letting go of intent, letting go of the need to arrive, this sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it all goes back to this basic paradox of the path, that we are an ego on a path to go beyond ego,
Mm.
and that there is this kind of constitutive tension in the path that is paradoxical, because as Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche would say, the ego is always keen to attend its own funeral. We want to be there to like see everybody, mourning us, lauding us, praising our transcendence of ego. If only we could be there to witness that. um, and from a more a problematic standpoint, it's like, how do we do the thing to go beyond doing things? Just basic paradoxes of the path. Um, and the result, the kind of offshoot always being spiritual materialism, that continually, or spiritual bypassing as a more local version of spiritual materialism, we're always doing whatever we can to surreptitiously include a little bit of ground in our practice of groundlessness, so that we can at least like lean back and then have this one thing to still rest on, or preserve this aspect of ignorance, in order to maintain, a kind of reference point of security. And that's just what the ego does, and there's no way around it. And so any path, um, that is path-based,
Mm.
is always shooting itself in the foot. And the best you can do from the standpoint of a path is to replace one level of fixation with another level that's a little bit more subtle, less gross, and then replace that fixation with something that's even more subtle. And you do this kind of thing, but really there's no end to that. Like, that whole attitude and approach only gets more subtle. So it's very easy to make the mistake of associating states of subtlety with the goal, because you've set the situation up that way. The path is structured in that way. And this is the premise of Dzogchen. This is why Manjushri Mitra went to Garb Dorje to debate with him about the nature of the path, that any path-based approach can never actually reach fruition. It's like an asymptote or something. And maybe in the best of cases, even with Tantra, you have such a good example that you can just step off and leave it. But the path itself, by definition, can't arrive fully.
Right.
And the premise of a great perfection is that, well, no, you don't even get involved in any of that, because on some level, on some subtle level, you're always reinscribing delusion. So only
Or
a
not
direct
so subtle.
approach of awareness itself, or not so subtle, right? Yeah. So only direct introduction is the only valid means of actually recognizing Buddha nature. So that's just where we're at, and so we kind of need both, because we're not generally prepared to receive direct introduction. So we have to do this thing called pretending to be prepared, which means, all the stuff we do on a path.
Right.
So it's just, it's all paradoxes, but hopefully, at least, becoming fluent in those dynamics can be helpful. So you know what you're getting into ahead of time, and you don't make the mistake of associating states uh, with reality itself. Um, and this is, the psychedelic scene is rampant with this.
Mm.
Um, Mystical, paths of mysticism are rampant with this. But that gap between the third and fourth empowerment of the example wisdom and the actual wisdom itself um, can't be bridged by another method.
Hmm. Oh, I kind of don't want to leave that question. But once again, I can't be selfish. I should carry on. Okay, actually, this is a really good question. I've had this question a number of times, so I'm going to slightly rephrase it from the questioner. So Jay asks, "Why do you think bliss accompanies concentration?" And I think this is an interesting question, and I don't know if you have studied the relevant things or have the relevant experiences to say, but it is sort of a it's quite interesting to say the least that simply by something that in a sense seems quite ordinary, by gaining a very profound state of concentration, even though that's difficult, it doesn't sound very sort of holy or anything, that a person might be able to generate unbelievable bliss in the body and the mind and then sit for a week at a time if they wanted to, or you know without sleeping or eating or drinking. This is a very unusual result based upon something that sounds so mundane. So yeah, your thoughts?
Yeah, we can only tolerate so much bliss. Um, but so in general, the to contextualize it, there are three main categories of what's called nyam, or experience, that we gain in practice. One is bliss, which can be physical bliss, what we know to be bliss. It can be a feeling of well-being, and it can be very subtle. It can just be bliss of release, of total expansiveness. And second is clarity, which can include all types of knowing, seeing, and so forth, visionary experiences, whatever it might be. And then the third is non-conceptuality. And so these are um, the typology of experience, but when they are integrated with knowledge of nature of mind, they are also the qualities of the kayas, of the Buddhas, the bodies of the Buddhas. And so the distinction is whether there is knowledge or not. And when there is knowledge, it means you know your nature, who you are. And just to treat that level of bliss, you know your nature is Sambhogakaya. Bob Thurman talks about, he translated Chakrasamvara as the great bliss wheel Buddha.
Hmm.
Bob was all about bliss. No one could talk about bliss like Bob Thurman. And one thing that I really appreciate is that the way that that's what I said initially, is that we just can't handle that much bliss. It's actually who we are, but what is unnatural is the way that we've clamped it down, attenuated it, ignored it, uh, dressed it up in whatever kind of uh, you know uh, clothes of morality or aspects of the status quo that can't be perturbed by someone who's just totally blissed out. It's very antinomian, right? Um, and you know, there's no room for capitalism, let alone you know, derivatives of that. and all of society has this, again, the status quo has as a through line the the implicit narrative that bliss is not your birthright. It's something that you have to earn, generate, create, steal, buy, borrow, you know, scrap it out. But if it's already there, then, well, you can cultivate it with methods, or you can relax into it with lack of methods. Concentration involves both. And if you're simply resting, you're becoming more familiar with what's already there. And when you unlock it, not keeping it locked down anymore, then it's known and it arises. It seems like an advent, something coming that wasn't there, but actually it's just the removal of restrictions to what is already there. And it's a really good example of the kind of paradoxes of the path that we were talking about before. And so, from a yogic standpoint, that is the path. It is the path of bliss. That whatever is locked up and clamped down in the body, obscured, numb, whatever it might be, all the knots that we have in our psychophysical being. Yoga is the practice of untying those knots, smoothing that out, releasing what is pent up. And so it's a very totally natural result.
Let's see. Oh, the chat has suddenly come to life with many, many questions. Right. Okay. Oats social media. Dave, one of my regulars, asks, how do you bring the experiences from practice into the moment with you in your day-to-day life?
This is something we talked about, you and I, before.
Yeah.
But really, and it's like an ongoing, it's a running joke of people who do 3 retreat, is that as soon as you get out of retreat, you land in a relationship, an intimate relationship. um, Partially because you've been in isolation for so long, but partially because this aspect of oneself that is completely unintegrated is longing to be known and to come out and play, be known, get messy, and be laid bare, right? And so it's just a natural thing. But at the same time, you can avoid it. And I think the most important thing for me, just leave it at that, has been to be in relationship and also to be a father on top of that, which is like double relationship, triangular relationship, arising in the space between. And whatever is relevant about practice has to be relevant in relationship, and whatever is not relevant in relationship doesn't really matter that much. And so, intimate relationship is a great authenticator of your practice, and it's not so much about the burden of bringing your practice into your life, as it is being so maybe recklessly open to the perpetual open heart surgery of being in relationship. And then you're not trying to figure out how to bring your practice into life. You're trying to figure out how just to stay afloat, you might say.
It's funny that
And
you're
yeah.
the second guest I've had on this podcast who has, quite serious practitioner who has said, and I actually say the same thing. It's kind of funny, is, if you really want to see how your realizations are doing, get married.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. No, it's, I mean, that's
you know?
the foil, right? So yeah, and it's at a certain point. what I'm trying to say is at a certain point, it's not the burden of trying to figure that out. It's you're in it, and so now, how do you measure up to it? Um, that's more the question, I think.
Hmm. Another question from Dave. When you think about the time you've spent meditating, I'm not sure exactly what he means by this, but I'll just put it out there the way that he did. What was the most revelatory experience or realization that you had? I don't know if he means that something counterintuitive or if he means something sort of deeply personal, but if it's the second, then I would excuse you for not answering it.
Yeah, no, it's a comment. Someone asked me this recently,
Hmm.
and it's very much related to what we were talking about before about the examples. So examples of realization, you might say, or like of recognition, can be high or low. They have all sorts of detail, um, narrative, and they're like things that you can report on and write back home about.
Hmm.
Um,
You mean
and
teachers, gurus?
they're trip reports basically. It's like, oh wow, that was something. Like I transcended time and space and achieved a state of total unity, whatever it might be. Like you can use descriptive words to bring out those examples.
Hmm.
But what the examples are examples of, um, ma sam jomeshara parochin, beyond speech or thought, like the nature of space. So there's not much to say about it, right? But then you have all of these like great, like you were talking about, all these great examples from the Mahasiddhas of the past.
Oh.
Tolopa getting slapped, Naropa getting slapped by Tolopa, the sandal, and then something happening, and that being the kind of pinnacle. Or um, the Pacha Rinpoche's student listening to the dogs barking at night. All these beautiful, wonderful stories of recognition,
Hmm.
and those are generally not that dramatic. Um, a lot of times, in the literature they are because they're hagiographical, but um, especially in the Mahamudra tradition, we have this wonderful phrase called ordinary mind, tamalji shepa, which points to the understanding that um, the greatest, most profound realization is of a type of ordinariness.
Hmm.
And so it kind of goes right back. And again, that's maybe a way of dodging the question. But for me to like talk about my trip reports might be cool. But it it's generally something that I do because of a certain situation, like
Yeah,
you know
yeah. No,
a
I
teaching
totally
situation or
understand. And
something. Yeah.
same when people ask
Mhm.
me sort of like, "Oh, tell me about the most amazing whatever, whatever." I'm sort of like, "Well, like if I knew you really well and it was relevant and helped, then I might do that
Mhm.
in private." But
Mhm.
it has
Mhm.
to be the right. It has to be organic and the right situation.
Yeah, and again, it's not because it's so amazing and grand, right?
Yeah,
Like that's all cool, but it's because it's missing the point, and it's
yeah,
not missing the point because you are fetishizing the unpointableness of whatever it might be either. It's just that it's not so important, and that uh, it's about reversing the question back to see what the presupposition of the person is that is looking for a particular narrative or story. Like, does that person have a presupposition that greatest realization is something mind blowing, non-conceptual? Is it something particularly luminous, clarity? Is it something particularly blissful? Right? It'll fall into one of those buckets in some way or another, and then that can be helpful for then being able to relate with the type of path that person has a proclivity for.
Hmm. That's a very, very good answer. Let me scroll through the chat a bit and see if there are questions. It looks like there's more conversations than questions. Let me see. Not seeing any more question marks. So actually, right on time for your schedule over there, I suppose. It looks like we have run out of questions for the day. So on that note, thank you so very much for attending and for giving these teachings and descriptions and experiences. And it's been really lovely having you. I hope to have you again whenever is convenient.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Yeah, and just
Yeah.
may all beings benefit.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Very
Okay.
good.
See you all.
Well, that'll be it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending. Hope to see you again very soon. Try not to die before I do.